Good morning and welcome to Theology Thursday. In this, what they have promised me is going to be a beautiful October day. It hasn't materialized yet, but maybe this afternoon. I hope so. We are on part 3 of the series, How Do Christians Vote? And again, not for whom, but how. What choices, what influences our choices? And this week I want to talk about what are the most important qualifications for a leader. It's a little more generic and it definitely applies to voting, but it applies all across the board. How do we choose our leaders, and what qualifications, what criteria are we looking for? It applies at work, it applies in church, it also applies to how we vote for our leaders. What are the most important qualifications? And I've had this conversation a number of times with people, and we tend to come up with different answers. Some believe that the most important qualifications for a leader is that they have leadership capability. In other words, do they command respect? Can they manage people? Can they cast a vision? Do people follow them? These might be important qualities in a leader, but you and I both know a lot of people with those qualities, and they have led us into some pretty terrible things. I mean, obvious choice, Hitler had those qualities, right? Under that definition, great leader. Not so much. So people can have those qualities and not be a great leader. I've written entire papers on the qualifications for leadership, given that I finished a doctorate on church leadership this year. And there were a lot of qualifications I listed in those papers, but somewhere there has to be a priority list, particularly when we're choosing between candidates with a lot of different qualities and different beliefs. And of course, we first turn to Scripture. How did God choose leaders? It's interesting that when Israel chose its first leader, they chose very much like the definition of a good leader that I just spoke about. They chose a handsome man who commanded respect, an imposing one with a great track record of strength and respect, to whom people looked up, literally. It was a disaster. On the other hand, when God chose his first leader, David, Scripture tells us that he didn't look for the things that human beings look for. He chose someone that everyone else overlooked. Why? Well, we find it is because David had a heart after God. And what does that mean? It means that he wanted to know God and follow him as best he could. It means he was humble. He knew his place before the Lord of the universe. Yes, David was very strong and very courageous, but these were actually secondary qualities to the fact that he wanted to obey God and do the right thing in every circumstance. That he did not do so later on was quite evident, and power corrupted him, and he did terrible, terrible things. But still, his heart at the beginning was one who chose right. And in the end, his humility when confronted with his own sin shows that he remained a man who did want to please God in the end, despite the middle part there. That nearly destroyed his kingdom and his family. We can learn good leadership qualities from both the good, the good, bad, and the ugly of David's life. And one is obviously humility. David chose to admit that he didn't do everything right. He chose to accept that he didn't know everything. He willingly leaned on other people to correct him and to guide him, even when they really corrected him pretty strongly. The kings in the Old Testament who refused guidance were the ones who are continually referred to as those who did evil all their days. And you see in there that they're the ones who wouldn't listen to other people, who only surrounded themselves, with people who said what they wanted them to say. It's simply a good leadership quality to know your own weakness and to surround yourself with people who know what you don't know. We see a leader in the New Testament doing this very well. We see the Roman army captain who came to Jesus to ask for healing, and he showed that he understood that God was above him and he needed to retain his humility. And because of this, Jesus healed the manservant. So we should look for humble leaders who can lead us holistically in this way. Look at perhaps God's greatest leader, Moses. God chose him partly also because of this humility. It says in Leviticus that Moses was one of the most humble humans alive. That's a pretty amazing commendation right there. This isn't a prerequisite for leadership that we think about very often. We tend to think more about confidence, and we look even at the overconfident people and we think, oh, what a great leader. They will really be strong and tough for us. But God considers humility a number one qualification. And this is counterintuitive to the way we tend to do things. Yet it makes so much sense. because humble people rely on teamwork. And all business models, all research everywhere agree that this is a much better way to succeed. And humble people also remember their place relative to God. And that's important. Why else did God pick Moses and David? Well, they were strong. They had both made a living as shepherds, which means they did learn to be tough and protective and physically capable. It certainly does come in handy as a leader to be tough because you get a ton of arrows thrown at you. And if you can't handle it, you don't do so well. So it's an excellent quality to have, although again, we tend to equate strength with brashness, boldness, and masculinity, none of which it needs to be. You can quietly protect your sheep, as Jesus did, without all the fanfare. Personal strength is very important, but we come by it in many different ways, and it looks different in many people. Some gain it by being tested physically, some by being tested mentally, or spiritually, or emotionally. Strength has many different faces. To be a shepherd, however, you also had to be compassionate and caring. A shepherd, as we know from Jesus' stories, goes about going after lost sheep. She heals them. She cares for their wounds, calms their nerves, makes sure they have everything they need for survival. This means that a good leader, according to God, because he equates shepherd and leader literally dozens and dozens of times in Scripture, he puts them together. He considers compassion and care as some of the most important qualities to embody in that case. Moses, in particular, is constantly interceding for his people, begging for mercy for them, offering to take the blame for their misdeeds. He is pretty incredible, really. A good leader leads the way in difficulty. Sure, he goes first when things are hard. Moses was the first one who walked into the Red Sea. He consistently showed his people that he was willing to take the first steps in the vision he was trying to lead them toward. And David did the same thing with his band of men. When he didn't go first, when the others were at war and he didn't go first with them, that's when he made his most fatal sins. A good leader will not let others take the fall. They choose to intercede, they choose to go first. Finally, continuing to look at both David and Moses as God's leaders, we see that a good leader is one whom you can trust because she or he has integrity. Yes, both men really messed up. Yes, they both exhibited terrible, terrible judgment at times. Yes, our elected officials will do that as well. They will have policies with which we do not agree. They will make mistakes. They will outright sin. But are they people whose integrity has been generally proven over time? Have we seen a track record, like we do with Moses and David, of choosing what is right over what is expedient? Do we see a willingness to listen, to learn, and to adjust? Integrity and humility go hand in hand. They aren't separable. And it appears that in Scripture, they override policy and personality every single time. So that's it for Theology Thursday today, and that is it for this series. Finish up the sacrament series with marriage. So I hope you come back then. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.